Hi guys. On this episode, I'm going to talk to you about storyboarding in a design sprint session. It can be one of the most frustrating one because it's so easy to go out of path and to lose focus in this one. So in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about how we do it here at Relab based on our experience and how to make the whole process a lot smoother so you save the stress out of the day. So one of the things that's very important to remember throughout the design sprint process is the goals, the questions, and the user journey that has been decided on day one. Now, we're going to fast forward to day 3 or day 2, usually, depending on which version of design sprint that you're working on. But I'm going to remind you that prior to starting the storyboarding session, it's very important to always look back to the goals, the questions, and the user journey that is the focus of the sprint. So I've drawn a very lo-fi version of a user journey. I'll actually link down below as well to a user journey video that we've done, user journey mapping video that we've done. So you could go back to it and remind yourself on how we do our user journey maps. But let's just say this is a user journey map. You've got a focus here that's circled in the red with the red marker, and that's really the focus of the team for the rest of the sprint week. So we're going to remind ourselves towards that before we go into the storyboarding session. Okay, so keeping that in mind, we know exactly which areas of a user journey that we're focusing on, and that's really what we wanted to remind ourselves again on what to storyboard. So one of the things that we've learned as well is before you start a storyboard, it's always best to think about the best ideal scenario of a user test flow. So what is it exactly that you wanted to test with your users on day 4 or day 5? And then try to picture that and narrow it down into 6 steps. So this is exactly what I've done so far. I've broken down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps, and each team members on a sprint team would actually do their own versions of the 6 steps individually. And then later on, there will be another process of voting, and the decider gets to pick which one, which winning user test flow are we going to move forward with. That's going to aid us for the storyboarding session. Okay, so prior to starting the actual storyboard itself, we'll go on a user test flow. We're going to go on a user test flow. So this is the user test flow. I'll just write it down. Test flow. So we want to picture the first step that the user would go through in our prototype. And then you wanted to fast forward and think about the last step that the user will go through in the prototype. So let's just say this was a booking system for an online course, okay? Let's say that's the product. So the first step that we've discovered that we're going to focus on based on the user journey, based on the goal, is login. And this is me doing it myself. The rest of my team members in the sprint team will also do their own version individually. And then I'll say the 6th step, which is the last step in the prototype, would be receiving a confirmation. So what I'll do here is pretty much fill the gap between step number 1 and step number 6. So step number 2, 3, 4, 5 is what I wanted to come up with. You don't have to stress too much about it. All you need to do is to try and think about the different steps that the user would go through in a scenario. So for example, I'd go login, select feature, and go browse, product, and go select product, make a booking, and then receive confirmation. So obviously there will be other steps in between number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that we haven't covered yet, but at least from my point of view and what I'm thinking right now, these are the high-level steps that the user would go through to achieve a certain journey that is our focus. Okay, so once you've done this, each of the team member will map out their own version up on the wall or the whiteboard, and then everyone gets to vote, similar to the rest of the other process in a design sprint. If you're familiar with it, then everyone gets to vote, and the decider either goes first or goes last, but the decider gets the power to select the winning user test flow that's going to help the whole storyboarding session, which we'll go after. All right, now that we've got our winning user test flow, that's what we want to focus on. We're going to try and elaborate that further into an actual storyboard. Now, the way we do it at Relab is slightly different, and we've kind of learned it through experience, and we find the best way for us to do this in a digital product environment is to actually picture a user interface flow. So we want to start with the high-level 6 steps, and we want to end with, say, step number 6 is receive confirmation, and we're going to start at login, which is step number 1. But between all of this, there's obviously more things that we haven't uncovered yet. So the way that we would do this is we would draw up a low fidelity sketch, similar to how you would have done the lightning demos, but I would say there's a little bit more details in this one. So for example, we'll start with the login screen. I'll just say this is a mobile device. So login screen, you draw that, and there's a couple of fields, call to action, login, there's a little interface that says forgot password, etc. But I do wanted to make it clear what the elements are. Remember guys, the idea is to have a blueprint at the end of the day. So on the next day, which is prototyping day, the team could come in with a prototyping mindset and know exactly what to do and what type of elements or interfaces are needed. So I'll write my little note in terms of what these things are, that it's clear for everyone, right? And this is the login screen. I'll just say login, right? This covers that. And then I want to move further to select feature. Select feature, as a team, we might discover that there's actually a supplementary interface that's needed between login and select feature. And then we decided that we wanted to also prototype that as part of the journey. Then we'll draw that up, call it the screen name, and then draw up an interface for it. Let's just say it's a tour point that you could skip. All right, and then we're gonna try and link this. That goes from there to there, and you move on further to the next screen. Let's say menu, a couple of buttons. All right, so all of this stuff, all of this designs and the way it looks could actually be heavily influenced by the lightning demo stuff, the winning 3-step solutions, the rest of the other exercises that we would have done as a team before we get into storyboarding. So at this time, you would have already have an aspiration on what visually it's going to look like, except we're just mapping out what these things are exactly. So it's going to help the stitcher the next day and the content writer and as well as the asset collector to know exactly what we're looking for and what screens we're creating. Okay, and then we're selecting feature. When we select feature, that's an action that happens in the menu. Let's just say, okay, it goes there. And then I'm gonna draw a few more here, and we might just fast forward the video. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. This is a simplistic way of me trying to explain it, but this interface flow, this user interface flow, could oftentimes be quite complex depending on what the focus of the sprint is. But what I've done here is I've mapped out step number 1 all the way down to step number 6, and in between them there will be interfaces, screens, supplementary pages that we wouldn't have thought about before, but it's going to be elaborated further and further. And sometimes in between screens there might be direct interactions as well. For example, from this all the way to that as a direct interaction. Therefore, we may need to consider another interface, for example, or whatever. Okay, but that happens a lot. But in doing so, what happens is, as a team, we're fully conscious of the different types of interfaces that's needed, that we're not going to miss too many things when we're prototyping on the next day. The traditional way of doing it in the design sprint is to block out the whiteboard and have different segments of it and then do it based on the grid itself. But we find it's a lot easier if you're focusing on the flow and create a user interface flow itself. And for us personally, it's actually been very efficient, and it makes the process a lot more clear in terms of what in terms of how it impacts the prototyping day and the next day. Because as the stitcher or the designer who's going to prototype the next day, they're going to see the flow, and it's a lot easier for them to link pages as well, because it's clear from this map what needs to link to what. Okay, so that's how we do our storyboarding here. If you've done a similar type of exercise somewhere else, or if you know any other hacks, let us know. We'd love to learn and hear from you. But otherwise, hope that's been helpful, and enjoy your day.